Good afternoon, and welcome to the second session in the Institute for Ethics and Government's first ever massively open online course. It's good to be here. I'm Patrick Shepard, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Ryan Segrist.
Hi everyone, I'm Ryan.
So Ryan, what are we going to be doing today?
So today, those of you who are in the first part of the massively open online course for outside activities that we did, we presented you a way of going about doing advice and counsel, a process for doing that. And then we explained very briefly the materials that we had and then set you loose to work on this for the last week. And so today we are going to rigorously force march our way through the entire list of statutes and regs that are going to be applicable to this case.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. We're going to take these one at a time in numerical order, starting with the laws and regulations. Starting with the laws and then moving on to the regulations. And we do that to ensure completeness. And when we're talking about outside activities, how many authorities? Like a dozen, 15? It's a lot of authorities.
Up to 17.
Up to 17
for regular employees.
Up to 17 authorities might need to be considered with advising on outside activities. So we want to make sure that we think about all of those things. So today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through these one at a time. So what kind of things should folks have available to them before we get started, right?
So the first thing that they should have is this request for outside activity approval. We're going to be going through this very briefly to make sure that we establish the facts of the case. We should also have this job aid, the table of applicable authorities.
I have mine right here, Ryan.
Good. I have mine too. We're going to be using that as a way to make sure that we're asking the right kind of questions to get into the nuts and bolts of how the laws and regs will apply.
I find on that one the key questions particularly helpful. So if you haven't taken a look at that, make sure you have that handy.
And the last thing that you'll want to have ready is your actual work, your outside activity analysis sheet.
And that's probably the most critical part, because this is where we're going to actually be going through and doing the work of advising Mr. Faraday about the outside activity.
That's right. And for those of you who are really on the ball, you should have your statutes and regs ready, because depending on what kind of questions we get, we're going to send people back to the statutes and regs fairly often.
Yeah, I always have mine handy, whether I'm teaching a class or attending a meeting or walking around the office. I find they come in useful pretty often.
They do.
All right, so let's see. Where should we begin? Should we begin at the beginning and talk about our request for approval for the outside activity? Make sure we all have the facts straight.
Let's go ahead and do that. And again, this is this sheet. So
request for approval of outside activity. The employee's name is Mike Faraday. So if you're looking for that one, it's the one that says Michael Faraday on it. So who is Michael Faraday, Ryan?
Well, so he is the deputy CIO at the Electrical Utility Agency.
And that's the pretend agency we work for, right?
That's right, and we use the Electrical Utility Agency as a pretend agency because any time that we've ever used an actual agency, everyone gets fussy at us.
Yeah, that's a fun thing. But yeah, today we all work for the Electrical Utility Agency, so the information we provided you about them will be helpful when we're trying to identify conflicts or other ethics concerns.
Mm-hmm.
So he's the deputy CIO, means he works in the CIO's office, probably has to do with procurements of technology things, the maintenance of the network, those kinds of services provided to the agency.
What else can we tell by looking at this set of facts here on this title page?
Yeah, I think when we look at forms like this, it's always important to think about, why are we asking for this information? Mm-hmm. The contact information is obvious because we're going to have to get back to Michael with a response to his request. But why do you think we need to know about his grade, step, and salary?
Well, because that's going to tell us whether or not we have other authorities that apply outside of the ones that apply to regular employees. You may recall that for covered non-career employees and for presidential appointees, there's a whole nother set of authorities that could be applicable.
Yeah, and it seems to be that Mr. Faraday is a GS-15, which makes him a career employee. Mm-hmm. So we don't have to worry about those extra authorities today.
That's right. So one other question. Why do you suppose we need to know the name of his immediate supervisor on here, Patrick?
I don't know. That's a good question. Do you think she might want to have input, or maybe you could provide us additional information where we don't have it?
Yeah, I think so. Who is going to know the kinds of particular matters that Mike Faraday is going to be working on?
Probably his boss.
Exactly.
Oh, fantastic. So that's the first critical bit of information. We mentioned that he's a career official, so we don't have to worry about those extra provisions, but those are included in your materials for completeness' sake. We just won't have to go into them into great detail today.
Mm-hmm. And also one other thing, the fact that he's a confidential filer is useful to us because we can then go back and look at his 450 to see if he's done similar things in the past or just to gather any other general information that we might need.
The last time we were discussing this, and we said, there are some strategies we can use if we don't have prior approval requirements. At the Electrical Utility Agency, we do have this prior approval requirement. But if you don't, it's very likely that the first time you see an outside activity is going to be on the 450 or on the 278.
Mm-hmm.
So what else is going on here, Ryan? What other information do we have on the next page?
So on the next page, we have identified, well, rather Mike has identified through this form, that what he's going to be doing is teaching, speaking, writing, or editing, which is important for us to know because we have specific regulation that is related to that. What is he actually going to be teaching, Patrick?
Yeah, so it looks to me like he is going to be teaching a course on computer network security at the University of Maryland College Park.
And is this going to be like a one-time course, or is it going to be like an actual course?
So my understanding is it's going to be about 16 weeks long, about 90 minutes per lecture. And it looks like he's done this before, so he's given us a syllabus, so we have some information about the subject matter of the course, which would be very helpful.
Yeah.
So that's not an unusual kind of request that we might see from an employee, particularly someone who's interested in teaching as an adjunct professor or otherwise at the university. But those are going to be some critical facts when we get close and we start looking at the actual regulations and how they apply.
Yeah.
So we're going to make a note of those. Get it on the subsequent page.
Well, we've got some information about who this outside employer is going to be. We know that it's the University of Maryland, and he has listed here that this is a public university, which is a useful thing to know.
Definitely.
And there's also a contact at the University of Maryland should we have any other questions that we need to ask.
And that can be helpful because, depending on the kind of request, be it a request for guidance or whatever, we may need some more information. And Michael may not be able to give that to us, and it might be necessary to reach out directly to the outside organization.
Mm-hmm. What about the next section, Patrick?
So we have a number of questions about the compensation, and this is going to be very critical. We have some specific provisions that deal with compensation and when we cannot or can receive compensation as federal employees for outside employment. And this indicates that he is going to be compensated. So this is a paid position at the University of Maryland. We also have a method or basis for compensation. He's going to be receiving a fee. And it looks like he's going to be receiving a number of other non-travel related expenses. And what are those, Ryan?
So he's going to be, the university is going to pay him to be able to park on campus, which at some universities, that's a really big deal.
That's a pretty good deal.
Yeah. He's also going to get 2 credits of tuition remission, so I guess he gets to take a course of some kind if he wants. He's going to have free access to fitness and health facilities on the campus, and he's also going to get 4 tickets to university sporting events.
This is the best compensation package I've ever seen for an adjunct professor. It's very unusual.
Yeah.
Normally they give you like a tank full of gas, it'll get you halfway to the job, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that's good to know. We're going to have to look at all of these in detail. Looks like he's going to get a fair fee, $4,500 for the semester,
mm-hmm.
Which is also going to be important. And we also know that the payer is the same source that's identified above.
Yeah.
So that the University of Maryland is going to be delivering the compensation to Mr. Faraday and not some third party.
Right. So what do we have for the following page?
So it looks like he's not going to need to travel for this job, so it's going to be a local job. And that's good because that's maybe one last thing we have to consider. He's also indicated the time period, and it looks to me like this is going to be the spring semester next year. So that's a good thing to know.
Mm-hmm.
He also indicates that it's going to take him about 3 hours per week for about 16 weeks. Which is a reasonable period of time, I imagine, for teaching a university course, and that all of that work will be done outside of his official duty time.
Right.
Very important. You want to make a note of that. You could highlight this or make a note on the form itself, so you remember that because that's going to be important when we come back.
Mm-hmm. And then on the next page, we actually have a syllabus. He said that he's taught this course before at Temple, and that he was going to be teaching something very similar to that at the University of Maryland. And just looking at this, Patrick, what do you think? Does this look like it's fairly specific, or does it look like it's kind of general?
I don't know. This is I'm not an expert in cybersecurity, but this looks like sort of your general outline or overview that you might see in an introductory computer security class. So it looks like it's kind of a typical situation. It doesn't look to be specifically about activities that are ongoing at the electrical utility agency.
Yeah.
So also a good thing to have. It's also nice that we have this supplemental information. If you have employees with similar requests, you can suggest to them that they provide any supplemental information they have, because it might make it easier for us to make our determinations. To that end, have you ever had an employee come in with the first request, no matter how carefully they filled out the form, and not needed any additional information in order to advise them?
I have never in my entire life heard of that situation. I believe you are describing a unicorn, sir.
Yes. And I make this point because as we go through the exercise today, you're going to find places where we don't have all of the facts we would need to make an absolute determination about whether or not a law or regulation is or is not going to pose a problem. And that's okay. It's okay if we don't get all the way there today. What we do want to try to do is know where those places are that we require more information and know what questions we would need to ask in order to get that information. So if that's as well as we do as we go through the exercise, that's pretty good. If we have a list of questions for Mike that can help us know whether or not it's going to be a problem, if we understand why we're asking those questions and why that information is important, we will have succeeded.
Yes.
All right, so now that we've taken a look at the request for approval for the outside activities, let's get into the analysis sheet. And I propose that we do this exactly as the sheet is organized. Go through one authority at a time, consider it in isolation, make an affirmative determination as to whether or not this poses a problem, does not pose a problem, or could unless we counsel Mike before we go on and think about any other issues.
Or if we need more information to make any kind of call like that on each authority.
Yeah. But are you okay with going through them numerically?
I am okay, and I have a specific reason for that.
Okay.
Because of the sheer number of authorities that can be in play for an outside activities approval, most of the time when we get those kind of analyses wrong, we're talking about sins of omission rather than sins of commission.
Yeah, it's usually the case that we forgot something.
Right, right. It's not that we're the ones that we did remember to do. It's not that we are getting those analyses wrong. It's just, well, we forgot to look at 205, and that's a problem.
Yeah, so we didn't consider a fact, or we forgot to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
Those are usually the things that come up. Those are the the surprises sort of hiding in the exercise. And as we go through this exercise, we're going to try and point out some things that you might find surprising.
And one other thing, just for your own information, this outside activity analysis sheet, if you found this useful in thinking about how to do an outside activity analysis, you can find this in our IEG store.
Yep. Usually when we teach this class as a workshop, the first question after the class is finished is, where can I get one of these? And that's the answer.
Right. That is the answer, and you can download it as many times as you want, make as many copies as you want.
And I suppose if all you get out of this class is that now you have a sheet to make sure you consider all the authorities, that'd probably be a victory for us.
That would be.
All right, well, let's start taking a look at these. Where should we start?
Well, since you propose that we go through them numerically in order,
That's a fine idea.
I think the first one we need to start with is 203.
All right, so what does 203 prohibit?
So 203 prohibits the receipt of compensation for representation on behalf of a third party to the United States.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yes.
So where do you think we might find a problem with Mike's proposed activity with respect to 203? I'm having a hard time seeing it. So what do we need? We need someone to be making representations before the U.S. government for a fee. And Mike would have to be sharing in that fee while he's a federal employee. Is that right?
Right.
So those are the questions we have. And in his role at the University of Maryland, he's teaching, and to me that doesn't seem like representational services. That's just teaching. Is that right?
Yeah, that seems right to me. Where would we more often find this particular issue come up?
I think I've seen this before with people coming into the government from private law firms that maybe have a federal practice. Sometimes we have concerns there where they might be receiving some money for representational services that are provided before the federal government. But I'm having a hard time seeing where this might come up for a UMaryland professor.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to me like he's being compensated for representation. He's being compensated for teaching.
Yeah.
And teachers are not often representatives of the university back to the U.S. government.
Yeah, so he's just going to be teaching students in the University of Maryland. He is being compensated, which is one of our threshold questions, but that compensation is not for representational services before the government.
Right.
So I think it would be fair to say that 203 likely isn't a risk in this particular situation.
I agree.
Cool. Well, that's a good start.
Yeah.
So far, so good for Mr. Faraday. How about the next one? This is also to do with representation.
Yeah. So we're on 205 now.
So what does 205 require? What does it prohibit?
So 205 is just it's a bit broader.
Yes.
It is a bar on any representation back to the U.S. government on behalf of the third party.
Any part of the U.S. government.
Any part of the U.S. government, with the exception. There are some exceptions.
Yes, but so not just the Electrical Utility Agency. So if Mike was to call the Environmental Protection Agency or the Department of Commerce on behalf of New Maryland to make a representation, that would be covered under 205?
That's right.
That's surprisingly broad.
Yes, it is.
Yes. Well, that's good to know, and that's probably something we need to be careful of. But I still don't see, as a professor at the University of Maryland or an instructor at UMaryland, where he would be representing Maryland back before the government. I think it's maybe a little bit like 203. It doesn't seem like there's inherently in that position much in the way of representation.
I agree, Patrick. That seems we could maybe torture some hypotheticals out of the facts, but he's there to instruct, not to represent.
Yeah. What about this situation?
Okay.
And this is something that I think came up for us one time not too long ago. What if they were having a special lecture on computer security in the government, and Mr. Faraday decided to call on behalf of UMaryland over to a colleague of his at the Electrical Utility Agency to see if he wanted to come over in his official capacity and deliver a presentation about some network security that we're doing in the agency? Could that potentially be a problem under 205?
Well, I think, yeah.
So that could be a problem. So we wouldn't have that situation now, because the New Maryland maybe doesn't have a lot to do with us. But by virtue of Mike being at the University of Maryland, the temptation might exist to make a request of the agency to do something in support of the university.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we just want to warn Mike about that. We want to tell Mike, we understand you're going to be there, and there might be the temptation to invite a colleague or ask for space from the Electrical Utility Agency or ask for materials. As a federal employee, Mike's not permitted to make those requests. Is that right?
That's right. We would want to make sure that we counsel him thoroughly to make sure he understands the breadth of 205 and what he shouldn't be doing, and also counsel him to come and talk to us before he does do anything where he might in any way be talking to the U.S. government. I
think that's the most important thing with 205 is because it's surprisingly broad and its prohibitions reach beyond those things that are intuitively categorized by people as wrongdoing. This is a place where you want to be particularly careful to explain the contours of the law so that people don't inadvertently violate. Because I don't think in the case that Mike was making a request for a speaker or for space or materials from the U.S. government on behalf of Maryland, that it would really occur to him that might be a kind of misconduct. So I want to be particularly careful here, even though it's maybe a minor risk.
Right.
So we're comfortable coming to that decision that 205 is a risk, but probably not a catastrophic risk. It's not going to prevent him from doing this job. It's just something we want him to be aware of.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is a risk, but it can be taken care of with appropriate prophylaxis.
Cool. That's 2 up, 2 down.
Mm-hmm.
It's not too bad. And Mike is still looking pretty good for being able to teach this class at UMaryland in the spring semester. So what does that bring us to? That brings us to kind of the granddaddy of the ethics laws and regulations, 18 U.S.C. Section 208, which deals with financial conflicts of interest. So where do we start here? Why are we concerned with financial conflicts of interest when it comes to outside activities?
Well, the reason why is because we want to make sure that he's not participating in any particular matters that could affect his financial interests or the interests of anybody who's imputed to him.
Would UMaryland's interests be imputed to him if he's a professor there?
Well,
should we take a look?
Yeah.
Let's take a look. So those of you who are following along in your offices, we're going to take a look at the text of 18 U.S.C. Section 208 in the compilation of federal ethics laws. If you're at your computer, you can also look up the text on the internet. That's 18 U.S.C. Section 208. If you have the white book, it's on page 19. So, Ryan, whose interests do we impute to the employee under the statute?
Well, so according to 208, the employee's own interests are problematic.
Yes, obviously.
Yeah. The interests of his spouse.
Okay, that makes sense.
minor child.
Also makes sense.
General partner.
Okay.
Yeah. Organization in which he is serving as an officer, director, trustee, general partner, or employee.
Interesting. So does that mean if he's an employee of the University of Maryland, that all of the University of Maryland's financial interests are imputed to him?
Yes.
So if he were to take any official action at the Electrical Utility Agency that affected the financial interests of the University of Maryland while he was serving as an employee, that could be a problem under Section 208.
Definitely.
Interesting. So we certainly have that question. So we want to find out, I guess the first thing is he going to be an employee? I know from my experience that sometimes in the case of adjunct professors, universities go to great care to make sure that they are contractors.
Why do they do that, Patrick?
I don't know why they do that, but I know that they do, and maybe it's for benefits reasons or retirement or whatever reasons the university might have. But
oftentimes they will list them as contractors because then they don't have to provide them with, like you said, benefits. They get to pay them an awful lot less. There are other financial reasons why.
So some advantages of that arrangement to the universities. But I don't see contractor listed under Section 208 as an imputed financial interest. So does that mean if he was not an employee, he was merely a contractor, that we wouldn't have to consider Section 208?
That's what the Office of Legal Counsel has said.
Okay, so we would have a concern because he still has his personal interest, right? So anything that would affect his continued employment or the receipt of his compensation from Maryland as a contractor would be disqualifying under Section 208. But all of the interests of the University of Maryland would not be imputed to him if he was merely a contractor.
Right.
Interesting. Let's keep reading.
Yeah, so what's the last one, Patrick?
So we have any person or organization with whom he is negotiating or has an arrangement concerning prospective employment.
Okay, so this sounds to me like it's saying if, based on the facts, it's not clear whether or not he actually has the job.
Right.
But it looks like they've gotten into some pretty detailed negotiations. So would the University of Maryland's interest be captured under the negotiating part as well?
I think it would be. I think the University of Maryland would be an organization that he is negotiating with or has an arrangement concerning future employment. And I also think that's true regardless of whether or not he will eventually be an employee or a contractor. I think we in the Office of Legal Counsel have not distinguished between those different kinds of arrangements when they're prospective.
That's right.
So once he became a contractor, we'd not be looking at an imputation under Section 208. We'd just be looking at his personal interest for purposes of 208.
So to make sure that I've got this clear, it doesn't matter whether he's going to be an employee or a contractor, as long as he is negotiating for future employment
or has an arrangement. The interests of that organization are imputed to him.
Right.
And then once he begins working, then we look to see if he is one of the people listed to determine if the imputation takes place.
Okay.
So it looks like at least for a little while, and maybe for a long while, the financial interests of the University of Maryland are going to be imputed to Mr. Faraday. So that's half of our equation. The other question is, are there any matters at EUA that would affect the financial interests of the University of Maryland?
Well, what kind of matters do we have that we need to talk about for purposes of 208, Patrick?
We need to talk about particular matters. And so those include specific party matters. Right? Those are like contracts, grants, investigations, licensings, requests, things like that.
Particular matters that have specifically named parties.
Yes. But also those other ones, the particular matters of general applicability, right? So the particular matters of general applicability, what are those? Are those like rulemakings and stuff? If we have like regulations or other matters that affect a class of persons or organizations.
Right. So it's not any specifically named entities. It's, for example, like the railroad industry. Might be considered, or railroad companies might be considered a discrete and identifiable class.
Those are the words, discrete and identifiable. That's what the class has to be for it to be a particular matter. So we'd be concerned about that. So I don't know, do we know if we have any matters at EUA that might affect the financial interests of the University of Maryland?
As far as I'm aware, we have no idea.
We don't know, so maybe that's something we might have to look for. This could be one of those places where Karen, Mike's supervisor, that could come in real handy. We could give her a call and find out if the CIO's office has any matters that would affect or involve the University of Maryland, whether she foresees those. So maybe like a tech transfer thing, or if they're a vendor we use for training.
Right.
Those could be potential problems under 208. Any other concerns we might have here? Because I know we had that sort of surprise when we were looking at Section 205.
Right.
Do you have any surprises lurking for Section 208?
Well, I think that one thing that, if we're going to go by the hypothetical that you put out for 205, I think one thing we also have to be careful of is the creation of particular matters from him as an employee of the University of Maryland, right?
So let me see if I see where you're going here.
Okay.
So you're saying that if Mr. Faraday, say on his way out from teaching at the University of Maryland, happens by the registrar's office and sees that the U Maryland is putting on, say, a 2-day network security conference.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I have a network administrator who just started in the EUA, and I am excited for him to get up to speed. We want to give him some training opportunities. So he picks up that leaflet, and next day he comes into work and hands it to his subordinate and says, fill out a training request. I think this is a great opportunity. I'll go ahead and sign that.
Oh.
Right, because
that could be problematic.
That could be a problem, right? Because the training request is a specific party matter. It's
Mm-hmm.
a contract for training.
Right.
And by making the recommendation, and merely the recommendation, he's participating. And
by saying he's going to sign it, it's definitely personal and substantial.
He's definitely participating personally and substantially. And the University of Maryland's financial interests are imputed to him. So we could have a potential big problem there.
Right, because that's something that will definitely affect the interests of the financial interests of the University of Maryland.
So maybe this is another place where we just want to be very careful to let Mr. Faraday know that sort of thing would violate or could violate the conflict of interest law.
Yeah. Do you think it's a showstopper though?
No, I think we can work around this. This is probably just a situation where we want to make Michael aware, and maybe Karen aware also, that matters affecting the financial interests of Maryland should be directed elsewhere within the organization. If, say, Mike was working on a major project that affected Maryland, maybe like a big technology transfer project or a partnership arrangement, then maybe we would find that the recusals wouldn't be workable, and we'd have to make Mike choose between working for the University of Maryland and the government.
Right.
But we don't have evidence of that here, so if that's not the case, we can probably move forward with a strong caution, much like Section 205.
Right.
So we'll have that. We'll indicate that one is a risk for sure. So let's move on. What's the next statute we have to consider?
The next one is 209.
So 18 U.S.C. Section 209.
Mm-hmm.
And what are we talking about when we talk about 18 U.S.C. Section 209?
Well, we're talking about supplementation of salary. So what does that mean, Patrick?
I don't know what that means, Ryan. I have a guess.
Okay.
Is the principle here that maybe 18 U.S.C. Section 209 is meant to ensure that federal employees are compensated only by the government for doing their government jobs? Is that kind of the gist of it?
That's right, because if you have someone who is not the U.S. government compensating someone for doing their federal job, you have a divided loyalty problem that could arise from that. So if an outside company wanted to pay me to do my federal work, who am I going to be more loyal to, the U.S. government or this outside company that's paying me to do it?
Can you give us maybe an example of when this would come up in a particularly clear way?
In a particularly clear way?
Yeah, sort of an obvious problem under Section 209.
Well, so maybe I could discuss the history behind it.
That would be great.
Before 209 was passed, there used to be this group of employees who worked at the U.S. Board of Education, the predecessor to the Department of Education, who were called dollar-a-year men. And there would be nonprofits, very big nonprofits, who would pay these people salaries, and the government would only pay them $1 every year. And because of that, obviously, they were doing everything that they could to make sure that the nonprofits got what they wanted out of the Board of Education, or the Education Board, and not giving the full faith and diligence to doing their government job.
Interesting. So the idea here is that by ensuring that federal employees are compensated only by the federal government for doing their federal jobs, we avoid those kind of divided loyalty situations.
Right.
So how might that work out with respect to Mr. Faraday? I don't see how this would be a major concern with Maryland. He's already told us that he's going to be doing this job outside of his official duty hours.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an indicia that suggests that maybe we don't have such a big problem.
Right.
He is being compensated, but the compensation to me seems reasonable for an adjunct professor. It doesn't look like he's being receiving a special bonus or special program because he's a federal employee. It seems that they're interested primarily in his general expertise.
Mm-hmm.
How could this be a concern for us?
Well, does he engage in teaching as part of his official duties already?
I don't know. That's a good question. That's maybe something we'd want to ask.
Yeah.
So you're suggesting that maybe if he was teaching this class for the federal government and also for U Maryland, we might have to look a little closer at it, because that might be something that would be properly part of his official duties.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And if it is part of his official duties, then the University of Maryland cannot pay him to teach it.
I see. Yeah, so that's maybe a question for Mike or for Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
Find out, is this a course that you normally teach for the Electrical Utility Agency or on behalf of the Electrical Utility Agency? So we can determine whether this might be more properly looked at as an outside activity.
Right.
As Deputy CIO, we don't have any indicia that that's the case here, though. So it seems to me this is probably not an issue, unless we had some special fact suggesting that it were.
Right. Now, what about all of the, because 209 says that it can't be enhanced as well, or supplemented or enhanced because of their official position.
Right.
So, what about the sporting tickets or the parking on campus or all that?
I guess the question we want to ask is this kind of the normal package for U Maryland adjunct professors? Does everyone get this, or is this the special EUA employee package?
Right.
Right. And if it were the latter, then maybe we have some further questions. If this is just the standard deal that they all get, maybe not such a big concern.
Yeah.
So again, I guess those would be some other questions we want to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. So do we think we can move on and close the book on 209 and determine that, pending the answers to our questions, from what we have here, it doesn't look like this is going to be a major problem for us.
Right. I agree. I don't think that it's going to be much of an issue unless we have some sort of weird showstopper fact come out of our questioning later on.
Well, excellent. I think that concludes our look at the criminal conflict of interest statutes. So that's good. So it looks like Mike is going to be able to engage in this activity, at least without contravening the criminal conflict of interest laws, which is fantastic. Though there are some places that we pointed out that we really do need to make him especially aware or cautious as not to create potential problems.
Should we stop for questions?
Yeah, let's do that. Sharon, could we go ahead and open it up for questions?
Certainly. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted, as your name is required to introduce your question. That's *1 to ask a question, *2 to withdraw your request. One moment, please, while we wait for the first question.
Great, thank you. And those of you who are watching on the Google Hangout, you can also submit questions in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can just type them in, your name will show up, and we will take those in the order we receive them.
And I am showing no questions from the phones at this time.
Okay. Looks like no questions from the phone right now, and also no questions from the Hangout. So shall we move on to the regulatory analyses?
Yeah, let's do that. And if you're just feeling particularly shy and you get the courage up to ask a question about the statutes later on, we'll take questions after we get done with the regulations as well.
Yeah. So feel free to jot those down or hold on to them, because we would like to take some of those.
Yeah.
All right. Well, where do we start in the regs? So when we talked about the statutes, Ryan, we were very careful to go in order from 203 through 209. Do you think we should do the same thing with the regs?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. No, we should.
Yes.
We're supposed to do them in order, Ryan.
I know. I was making a joke.
I know. Yeah, so we're gonna want to take these in order again, because again there are a lot of authorities to consider, and usually when we have a problem, it's because we failed to consider an authority, not because we considered it and got the analysis wrong.
Right. So what's the first one we're going to talk about?
I think we should take a look at subpart B of the standards, the gifts from outside sources.
Okay.
And this will give us an opportunity to maybe practice our gifts microprocess, so we can practice a little gifts analysis while we do this. So what are we prohibited from doing by subpart B of the standards?
Well, so we're prohibited from accepting a gift from a prohibited source or that is given because of our official position. So let's go ahead and look at what exactly that says. Those of you who have the blue book,
we will have the same page numbers. Those of you who have a green or brown or other colored book, the page numbers will be off, but the citations will all be the same.
Right. So what does that general standard at 5 CFR 2635.202 say?
So it says, except as provided in this subpart, an employee shall not directly or indirectly solicit or accept a gift from a prohibited source or given because of the employee's official position. So let me make sure I understand this, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't accept gifts from prohibited sources.
Right.
And we also can't accept gifts given because of our official position.
Right. So let's say, a prohibited source is anyone who does business or seeks to do business with the U.S. government.
Yes.
And so let's say that there is a contractor here at EUA. We all work for EUA today. Let's say that there's a contractor that we deal with on a regular basis who wants to give me a gift.
So they're doing or seeking to do business with our agency, so they're going to qualify as a prohibited source.
Right.
Also, if we regulated them, maybe an electrical company that we regulate, they'd also be a prohibited source.
Mm-hmm.
Folks like that. So
Right.
people would be affected by the work of the EUA.
Right.
Okay, so the contractor definitely is one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to give you a gift.
Right.
So that would be prohibited, regardless of whether they were giving that to you because of your official position. Is that right?
That would still be prohibited, yeah, because it's from a prohibited source.
Okay. So what's the other side of that? So say we had someone who wasn't a prohibited source, not someone we regulate, not someone who does or seeks to do business with the agency. Maybe a nonprofit organization, unrelated to us. They're interested in public service generally.
Mm-hmm.
If they were to offer you a gift because of your status as an EUA employee, that would also be prohibited, right?
That's right. They could not give me a gift just because I'm a federal employee.
Regardless of whether or not they're prohibited sources.
Right.
So we only have to meet one of those two thresholds.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean for the University of Maryland?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to know is whether or not they're a prohibited source.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know either.
So what questions might we ask? We probably want to talk to our contracting people or our technology transfer folks and find out if we have a relationship with the University of Maryland. Maybe they're a provider of training for us. Maybe we partner with them for events and other things. So that's just going to be a factual determination. Is the University of Maryland a prohibited source?
Right.
Okay, so that's a question we can add to our list to dig into.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this other question, whether or not anything is being offered to Mike because of his official position. And there we don't know either, right? It looks like this is an offer for, the offer of compensation and assorted benefits comes to us, comes to Mike because of his expertise and because he's willing to teach this course.
Well, maybe it might be useful to go back just a step here. Let's go ahead and look at the definition of what a gift actually is.
Okay, let's take a look at that.
So that's going to be at 2635-203B.
Okay, so it includes any gratuity, a favor or discount,
Mm-hmm.
entertainment, hospitality, loan, forbearance, other items having monetary value. It includes services as well as gifts of training, transportation, local travel, lodgings, and meals, whether provided in kind, by purchase of a ticket, payment in advance, or reimbursement after the expense has been incurred.
So what word is not in there?
I don't know.
I don't see the word compensation in there.
It's true. So there is a suggestion, maybe not compensatory things.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have things like entertainment.
Yeah.
The basketball tickets seem like entertainment to me.
Mm-hmm.
Travel and transportation costs, the parking could fit into this category.
Right.
And again, we don't really know what the relationship is that is leading to the provision of these services to him. But let's just say for the moment, for the sake of going through the rest of our process, that one or more of those items qualifies as a gift for our purposes.
Okay, let's just say that.
Okay, and let's also say that Maryland either is a prohibited source or may be offering these things, at least in part because of his official position.
Okay.
So say both of those things. We'll just posit them for the minute so that we can finish our analysis and look to some of the exceptions.
Well, so let's go ahead and kick that analysis in. What is the analysis?
And so I think the first question is, do we have a gift?
Right.
Right. So let's say the basketball tickets and the parking and the tuition remittance qualify as gifts under our definition.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be step one. So we're going to answer yes to that question.
Right.
And our second question is the gift prohibited? Does it meet the general prohibition? And let's assume for the time being that the University of Maryland is a prohibited source.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know that, but let's say they are. So in that case, it would meet the definition, or it would meet the general prohibition. It would likewise meet that prohibition if we thought this being offered in part because of his status as a federal employee or an EUA employee.
Right.
So then where do we go?
Well, then if we've already met those first two parts of the process, now we have to look at the exceptions to see if there's any exceptions that might apply. And how does that work? So we've got these things called exclusions.
Right.
The definition of a gift, and then we've got these things called exceptions. How are they different?
And I think the exclusions are excluded from the definition. So they're not even gifts.
Oh, so they're not gifts.
They're not gifts. So if something is excluded from the definition of a gift, it's not a gift. So we don't have to go to that second part and find out if it's prohibited.
Okay.
So we've looked at the exclusions, and there's no exclusion for basketball tickets or parking or tuition remittance. So we're back to the exceptions. The exceptions are gifts that meet the prohibition, but they can be accepted.
So they're prohibited gifts that, notwithstanding the prohibition, it's still okay if they meet the criteria within the exception.
That's correct. They are gifts that may be accepted.
Okay.
Then I think we're going to get we're going to be much happier after we take a look at these because there's something that's going to be exactly on point that's going to help us with this analysis. So let's see. A doesn't look like it's going to do it.
No.
B doesn't necessarily help.
I don't know if you can have a personal relationship with the university.
That would be an interesting question to look into.
Yes. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin?
Yes. Discount's probably not there. It's not an award or honorary degree. How about E, Ryan? Gifts based on outside business or employment relationships.
Oh, this could be a good one. What does that say?
So an employee may accept meals, lodging, transportation, other benefits resulting from the business or employment activities. That's good. Of an employee's spouse.
Well, this is Mike, not his spouse.
Yeah, it's not. It's not Mike's spouse's outside activity. So
it can't be
E1
E1.
doesn't help us.
What about E2?
Let's take a look at E2.
It says resulting from his outside business or employment activities when it is clear that such benefits have not been offered or enhanced because of his official status.
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty much exactly on point. So we just have one question to ask them.
Yeah, we need to ask the University of Maryland whether or not they offered or enhanced those benefits.
Because of Mike's official status.
Right.
And if the answer to that question is no, then we can use E2. And regardless of the answers to our first step in the analysis, which is it a gift, and then is it prohibited, we can rest certain that these may be accepted.
Right.
Cool.
Now, that's just what we were saying.
Yes.
For purposes of going through the gifts analysis.
That's right.
One thing that we will get into once we get there is the definition of compensation under 807, which...
It's going to be more interesting.
Right. That's going to be more interesting, and it would capture those extra benefits as well.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those situations where it's really important to take each analysis as a separate analysis.
Right.
This analysis under subpart B doesn't answer the questions for any other subparts of the standards, nor the conflict of interest statutes. So we did the analysis under the gifts rules, and we found out that the gifts rules are probably not going to be problematic for the acceptance of these. Of this compensation and assorted benefits.
That's right. And the thing is if he does get offered any other gifts, then we would just kick a new analysis.
Yeah. Excellent. So I think we can say that we're probably not going to have an issue under subpart B of the standard.
I agree. I don't think that we really will either.
Okay. But that's a useful exercise and good practice to go through.
Right. So what's the next one?
So the next one looks like subpart E of the standards.
Ooh, this one's one of my favorites.
The impartiality regulation. And so what's going on with the impartiality reg?
So the impartiality reg, we've got two different prohibitions that occur in the same sentence. So let's go ahead and take a look at that in our regs. So the citation is 5 CFR 2635.502A, consideration of appearances by the employee.
Okay. Let's have a look there. So when an employee knows that a particular matter involving specific parties. So already we have a difference.
That's right.
So we're talking about particular matters, but only those that involve specific parties. So those were the ones like grants and licensings, investigations, litigation. Those matters with named parties. So we're not talking about those other ones. What were the magic words?
Particular matters of general applicability,
yes,
like rulemakings or regulations that affect a discrete and identifiable class of entities.
Those magic words.
Yeah.
So we don't have to worry about those here.
Nope.
We're only talking about those matters involving specific parties, like grants, litigation, contracts, etc.
Right.
All right. Well, that sounds okay.
Yeah.
Let's keep reading.
So, involving specific parties is likely to have a direct and predictable effect on the financial interest of a member of his household.
Well, that sounds a lot like Section 208. And that's kind of tricky, right? Because 208 already captures some probable members of the household. Right? Who did we say? We said the spouse and the minor child.
Right.
Are covered under the criminal statute. So they're also covered under Subpart E of the standards?
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, so if they're a member of the household, they are here too. But we probably, by doing the statutes first, we would have already created the necessary recusals, etc. We've already taken care of this in most cases. But I guess this would capture other people too, right? So we'd have other relatives living in the household, roommates, significant others who are other than a spouse. So we're a little broader in one sense, and a little narrower in the other.
Right.
208. All right.
So that's the first horn that I mentioned.
That's the first horn.
That's the first part of it. So let's go ahead and go to the second part. Or knows that a person with whom he has a covered relationship is or represents a party to such matter.
Okay, so that's really confusing. So again, we're talking about specific party matters. And someone with whom they have a covered relationship, not sure what that is or represents a party. That's totally different than what we saw before in Section 208. So does this mean they literally have to be one of those named parties or the representative of one of those persons?
So, well, actually, I want to back up before we go to the is or represents a party part.
Okay.
Because that's a lot more confusing than who has a covered relationship.
Okay, so you're telling me you know who these covered relationship people are.
I do. We have a definition for this, a very helpful one, and I'd rather get that parsed out because I think that's the easier one first.
Good. Let's do it your way.
Okay. So, if we take a look at 2635 502B in the definition section, B1. So a person has a covered relationship with, and we've got a whole list of different people who there could be a covered relationship. So instead of us reading all of these out loud, take a minute or two just to read them all to yourself, and then we'll point out the ones that are most relevant to our situation.
Okay. All right, Ryan, I think I got one.
Yeah? What do we got?
I think that first one is pretty important for us, especially if we have that situation where he's an adjunct professor as a contractor. So any person other than a prospective employer, that's good, right? Because we talked about the prospective employers. Those guys are covered under Section 208, right?
Right. That's a criminal statute.
So other than a prospective employer. So once he starts, if he's a contractor, has or seeks a business, contractual, or other financial relationship other than a routine consumer transaction, I think providing teaching services to the University of Maryland as a contractor would meet this definition. Is that right?
I think it would.
Okay, so we have a covered relationship with the U Maryland while he's a contractor. I saw another one that I think is maybe not something we need to think about right now, but might be important. What about 4?
Oh, this is a good one, too, that we need to talk about. So that's any person for whom the employee has, within the last year, served as officer, director, trustee, general partner, agent, attorney, consultant, contractor, or employee.
So you're saying even after the spring semester is finished and he's no longer teaching the class, he's no longer an employee or a contractor in Maryland, he has a covered relationship from 1 year thereafter?
Right. And he cannot participate in particular matters involving specific parties that involve the University of Maryland.
So if U Maryland is or represents a party, we should consider the appearance reg before allowing him to participate.
Right, and that's even if he no longer works there.
Yeah, so for 1 year, regardless, we're going to have a covered relationship.
Right, so there is a lingering covered relationship after the completion of his services to the University of Maryland.
Okay, interesting. So we're going to have maybe a recusal requirement here, or at least the need to consider appearance issues, right? Because we also have the reasonable person standard.
Right.
So if Maryland is or represents a party, while he has a covered relationship with them. We have to determine whether or not his impartiality be questioned, and if it would, he would not be able to participate. Again, this is another case where it's really important that we looked at the criminal statutes first.
Right.
Because Section 208 has similar recusal requirements imposed on Mr. Faraday. We want to put those in place first. And those are going to always be primary, with the regulatory provisions as secondary. So we want to make sure that we take care of all the criminal matters before we start looking at impartiality concerns.
Right, and the reason why is because there are criminal penalties. We want to make sure that we are protecting our agency, and also we are advising our employee in ways that will prevent them from committing crimes.
Yeah, that's always a good thing to do.
Yes.
Yes. All right, so we will definitely, at least for some period of time, have a situation where Mike has a covered relationship with the University of Maryland. And during those time periods, we want to make sure that he doesn't participate in any specific party matters that involve the University of Maryland, if a reasonable person would question his impartiality.
Right.
So would it be fair to say here that what we have is a risk?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So very much like our 208 analysis, with a slightly larger universe time-wise, we have kind of a continuing risk.
Right. It's a continuing risk, but it's one that we can mitigate with the appropriate prophylaxis.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Where do we go next?
So the next one that we're going to go to is one of my favorite ones.
Oh no, I don't like it when it's your favorite ones.
So the next one that we're gonna go to is the misuse of position regulations, subpart G.
So is this like the don't steal office supplies rule?
This is part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can see how this might come up.
Yeah. So we've got a whole bunch of these, but take a look at 2635.701 in the overview. And we've got kind of a list of things here. You know, we've got the use of public office for private gain, we've got the use of non-public information, we've got the use of government property, and the use of official time.
All right. I can see how this could come up.
Yeah.
You know, with Mike teaching the class.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something we might be concerned about is Mike taking time at his job at EUA to prepare his lecture, or using a subordinate's time, things like that.
Yeah. What if he were to use a copy machine to make handouts for his students at the University of Maryland?
Well, that seems like that might be a misuse of government property. It's not an official government purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm kind of seeing where you're coming from.
Yeah, and in particular, the really tricky one here, I think, is the use of non-public information.
Okay.
So what kind of information is non-public?
Information that's not readily available to the public, secret information,
Right.
Or merely information that's not been made available to the public.
Right, anything that's not been made available to the public.
Okay, so why would that be a concern for us?
Well, because how easy do you think it could be to, begin a class?
Okay.
And you're talking about network security.
Yep.
And you can now tell a story about one of your employees who just totally missed the ball and let the network go down, and only EUA knows about that so far. Not everybody else does.
I see. So if Mike had a kind of tough day at work, they had a security breach or an attack of some kind, and then he relays that story in class, and that's not public information yet, that could be a problem with subpart G.
Right.
All right, I see. So what are we going to do? So what do we need to tell Mike?
Well, I think subpart G is interesting because it's almost all counseling issues.
Okay.
So we need to counsel him not to misuse government time or government property. We need to counsel him not to use non-public information.
Okay.
And we also need to ensure that he didn't use his public office in order to get the job in the first place.
Okay, well, that makes sense to me. So this is going to be kind of boilerplate counseling stuff. Make sure that he understands what the restrictions are so that he can avoid violating the rule.
Right.
Well, that sounds straightforward enough, and that doesn't sound like the sort of thing that's going to stop Mike from being able to teach his class.
Right.
So do we have yet another risk?
I think it is a risk, but again, it's one that we can mitigate very easily.
So as we're going through this, and we're nearly at the end, but we've identified a huge number of risks. It seems to me that this is going to be a pretty long opinion that we're going to write for Mr. Faraday.
One thing that I always like to remind people is that your opinions need to be complete, and the best set of instructions that you can give an employee about what they can do or not do with an outside activity is a complete set of instructions.
Yeah, and I think the complexity here and the number of authorities we're talking about I'd really like to have a chat with Mike on the phone or maybe in person so that we can go through the opinion. I can point out places that he needs to be particularly careful. Is that a good thing to do?
I think that's a great thing to do, especially if you can get an in-person meeting with him so he knows who you are and he knows where he can find you and how to reach you, so that anytime he's got any kind of question at all, he can call you up and get your advice before he takes any kind of action that could potentially implicate the criminal authorities or get him in trouble with the regulations.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, because once we have issued this first opinion, that's really just kind of the opening advice.
Right.
Right. Facts are going to change, and Mike's going to need to know when he needs to come talk to us for further advice as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So we want to make sure that he's particularly aware of when those situations are and who he can come talk to.
Right.
All right. Well, it looks like we have one more authority. Is that all?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that brings us to 2635-807, the regs related to writing, teaching, and speaking.
Yeah.
It seems like kind of a funny place to end, as I think a lot of people would start here.
Right.
Because he's proposing to teach. But now we have the specific provision. That's fantastic. Should we take a look?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, I think I found it. It's on page 606, 2635-807A. This is interesting. It says compensation for teaching, speaking, or writing.
Mm-hmm.
So this might be of use to us. There are a couple of things that suggest to me we should be careful when we read this.
Right.
One, he's teaching, and two, he's being compensated.
Right.
So yeah, this sounds really good. Let's take a look.
So what does that say there? It says, except as permitted by paragraph A3 of this section, an employee, including special government employees, shall not receive compensation from any source other than the government for teaching, speaking, or writing that relates to the employee's official duties. Excuse me.
This is kind of a bummer. It looks like we've come all this way, and now Mike's not going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
He's the CIO. He does network security. He's going to teach a class about network security. That looks like it relates to his job.
Mm-hmm.
He'll be compensated. So maybe he can't get paid for this. Well, that's kind of a letdown.
Yeah. Well, so what are some things that we need to pull out of here and maybe examine a little closer?
Yeah, maybe we don't know what it means to relate to the official duties.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we'd like a definition of compensation.
Okay.
So let's see if there's hope for Mike yet. Let's take a look at those definitions.
Okay, so which one do you want to look at first? Related to official duties or compensation?
Let's look at related first, because I think this is a pretty clear-cut case.
Okay.
It relates to the official duties if the activity is undertaken as part of the employee's official duties. Well, we talked about that already.
Right.
And we determined what it probably didn't. It didn't seem that this was part of Mike's official duties.
And we can always verify that with his boss.
Yeah. Okay. So far so good. Maybe there's hope for Mike.
What about B there? Circumstances indicate the invitation to engage in the activity was extended to the employee primarily because of his official position rather than his expertise on the particular subject matter.
Well, I don't know. We don't have enough information here, do we?
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'd want to know where the invitation came in. Was Mike contacted on the outside, at his personal email address, or at his home, or at some other outside activity? Or was he contacted at work as our deputy CIO?
Right.
So maybe those would be useful indicia. I guess that's something we just have to ask Mike.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's assume that's not the case and move on.
What about that third one, Patrick?
And so this says that the invitation to engage in the activity was extended to the employee directly or indirectly by a person who has interests that may be affected substantially by the performance or non-performance of the employee's duties.
Well, that seems like a straightforward factual question.
Yeah, so I guess we just have to find out when we're asking about whether or not Maryland has matters before EUA.
Mm-hmm.
If Mike is personally involved in those such that they would be affected by the performance or non-performance of his duties.
Right.
We said before we didn't think there were any indicia to this effect. So let's just assume that that's not the case.
Yeah.
Keep looking.
So this next one I had mentioned earlier, the non-public information.
Yeah.
This next one, it may be related to his official duties if the information conveyed through the activity draws substantially on ideas or official data that are non-public information is defined in 703B.
Oh, so we looked at that kind of already.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we just want to be careful here. And we said that was a risk that was manageable, that maybe we could just caution Mike not to disclose non-public information in the course of his duties.
Now, if he did hand us a syllabus that was nothing but non-public information.
Yeah, we might have to have a more in-depth chat at that point.
Right.
All right, so I'm feeling a little better about Mike's prospects here.
Yeah.
Then E says, except as provided in this paragraph, the subject of the activity deals in significant part with two of those things. Any matter to which the employee is personally assigned, presently assigned, and to which the employee has been assigned during the last 1 year. So if he was teaching a class about the goings-on at EUA's CIO shop over the last year or presently, maybe that would be a problem under E.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem like that's what he's going to be teaching.
No, this looks pretty general to me so far.
The second one, any ongoing or announced policy, program, or operation of the agency. Again, based upon his syllabus, it doesn't seem like he's talking about EUA specifically.
No, it doesn't look that way. In the case of a non-career employee, we determined he was a career employee.
Right.
So another savings by looking at the first page of that of the request. But if we had a non-career person, we'd want to look at 3. And then we have some clarification in paragraph 4 there. What does that say?
It's related to special government employees.
Okay, well, we know Mike's not a special government employee, so that's
Right.
probably not going to apply. So maybe we're not going to have a situation where this is related. Maybe this isn't a course that's related to his official duties for purposes of 807.
Right.
We found some places where that we might get close to the line, but that seems like those things can be managed.
Yeah. Does it seem to you that we could, provide him enough counseling and give him sort of the contours of what is prohibited there to keep him from straying into bad 807 territory?
Yeah, I think we probably could. So let's look quickly at the definition of compensation.
Okay.
And see how we land.
So that is on page 608 if you're following along in the Blue Book.
The Blue Book. Always bring the Blue Book.
Yes. All right, so what do we have here? We have a whole list of things, don't we?
Yeah. Oh, I remember this one. This one always makes me angry.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I find it confusing. So it includes any form of consideration, remuneration, or income, including royalties given for or in connection with the employee's teaching, speaking, or writing activity. Okay.
Okay.
Pretty much anything.
Right.
Unless accepted under specific statutory authority. Okay, so that's pretty standard. It includes transportation, lodging and meals, whether provided in kind by purchase of a ticket, payment in advance, etc. So that sounds a lot like our gift definition.
Right.
And then, much like our gift definition, we have some exclusions from that definition. So it says, offered by any source that could be accepted from a prohibited source under subpart B of this part. All right, so if we get accepted as a gift under subpart B, it's okay.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. What about this second part? Meals or other incidents of attendance, such as waiver of attendance fees or course materials furnished as part of the event at which the teaching or speaking takes place.
Okay. So there are certain things that are necessary to facilitate the speaking engagement.
Right.
And we can accept those under B.
Gesundheit.
Thank you. Or those wouldn't qualify as compensation for purposes of 807.
We've also got copies of books or publications containing articles, reprints of articles, tapes of speeches, and similar items that provide a record of the teaching, speaking, or writing activity.
So Mike could keep a video cassette of his lecture,
right,
if that was offered to him. And that wouldn't be compensatory. That wouldn't be compensation for 807.
Right.
Okay, that's cool.
What's this last one, Patrick?
Oh, this is the one that makes me mad. In the case of an employee other than a covered non-career employee, so that's all of our career officials, anyone who's a member of the Career Civil Service, as defined in 5 CFR 2636-303A. Travel expenses consisting of transportation, lodging, or meals incurred in connection with the teaching, speaking, or writing activity. So we explicitly include transportation costs, and then we exclude it for everyone except covered non-career officials.
Why did we do that?
Why did we do that, Ryan? Why did we do that? Do you have any idea?
Well, there is a court case called Sanjor that basically they told us that travel expenses are not
compensatory.
Compensatory, thank you.
And it was specific to career officials. So hence the weirdness of the definition.
Right.
Well, that makes me feel better.
Yes. It is not out of spite that it is that way.
Yeah, well, that's much better. So I kind of understand that.
Okay.
All right, so it looks like some of the things Mike is going to be receiving are compensation for purposes of 807.
Right.
And we said we could probably massage the content to make sure that it's not related to his official duties.
Right.
Is there any more on-point relief that we might be able to find in 807?
Well, how's about if we take a look at page 609 and...
Oh, I see. The exception for teaching certain courses? Is that
yes.
where you're looking?
Yeah. What does that mean?
We should have started here, Ryan. We should have just begun at the end, and then we wouldn't have had to do all this stuff leading up to here.
Well, but at the same time, if we had just started at the end, we would have skipped all of those criminal statutes and not identified the risks that were there.
That's true. I guess it does make sense to take them in order.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so what does this say? So it says, notwithstanding that the activity would relate to his official duties. So never mind those definitions that we just spent 10 minutes talking about.
Right.
It doesn't matter. An employee may accept compensation, so whether it's compensatory or not, it can be accepted.
Mm-hmm.
For teaching a course requiring multiple presentations, so we have multiple, he said 16 classes.
Right, he's going to teach for a whole semester.
A whole semester. By the employee, if the course is offered as part of the regularly established curriculum.
Okay.
So that sounds like we're good there.
Network security sounds kind of like regularly established curriculum for a computer degree.
And I think he gave us a course number in the material, so
right.
It looks very much like it's part of the regular curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
An institution of higher education. Maryland's going to meet that definition, I think.
Yeah.
Or an elementary school or a secondary school. Or a program of education or training sponsored and funded by the federal government or by a state or local government. So that first one gets us there. So notwithstanding the fact that it might be related to his official duties,
right,
and notwithstanding that he's being compensated, he can accept the compensation because it's part of the regularly established curriculum of the University of Maryland.
Right.
So I think we can say that 807 is not likely an issue.
I agree.
We have an explicit exception that's on point.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So I think that might conclude our analysis of the Mr. Faraday case.
That does, at least as far as we can take it.
Yes.
We did identify some places where we would want to have some more information, or where we would go back to Mr. Faraday, or maybe to the university, or maybe to his boss, to get some clarification as to whether or not something is a risk or doesn't apply.
And we certainly had some situations where we're going to need to caution Mr. Faraday about certain activities that could contravene one or more of the provisions of the criminal conflict of interest statutes or the regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So we're definitely going to want to do some in-depth counseling in those areas that we've identified as risks. But I think the most important thing we did was we practiced a process that will make sure that our advice and counseling opinions are thorough and complete, and do not commit those errors of omission.
Right.
So I think maybe if that's the principal thing that you got out of this class, that's fantastic.
Should we open it up for questions one more time?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Sharon, could we open it up for questions? And those of you on the Hangout, if you'd like to type your questions in, we'd be happy to take those.
Yes, as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *1.
I can understand why you might be a little concerned about a question. It's complicated stuff sometimes.
Yes, it is. It is. Like just trying to disentangle which question.
Yes. Maybe we did a fantastic job, and there are no questions. It feels adequately prepared.
There are no questions in queue at this time.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm not showing any questions on the Hangout, so it seems it's the latter. Fantastic job, sir. No, but we do hope you all enjoyed this and found this to be useful. And if there is a takeaway, we'd really encourage you to take a methodical approach to our outside activities analyses. Because, again, making sure to consider all of the provisions is probably the most important thing.
Right. Make sure that you do a complete job with it. It's always when you miss something.
Yes.
When I used to be a desk officer, if I had a nickel for every time that I would get a call about an outside activity, someone would want some help with it, and I would say, well, what about 205? And I would hear someone say, oh, no, I didn't think about that one.
Didn't think about that.
Yeah.
We don't want to be the people who didn't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So use the worksheet, use the job aid, and make sure that your advice is thorough and complete. Oh, and we do have a question. Excellent. No question. Oh. That's a fantastic question. Thank you. The comment is not a question, but it's that everything on the blackboard appears mirrored. And that's hilarious because Ryan and I spent about 15 minutes before this course began writing the laws and regulations backwards on the blackboard because from our perspective, it's mirrored. So it's very good to know that you guys at home see it properly and we can resume writing in the correct direction and do not have to continue to cultivate our skills of backwards writing.
Oh my gosh, that is great news, though. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Christy. That is a fantastic relief for us because I find it really challenging to write backwards.
Yeah.
Excellent. And with that, thank you guys very much. We look forward to doing some more of these massively open online courses.
If you could, we would like to take a moment just to remind you that you're going to be getting a course evaluation, and we very much want your feedback, particularly for this first one because we've never done it before. So please, please, please let us know what you think we could do better with the massively open online course format, and we will make those changes.
Yeah, no, that's great. And next time, one change I can promise you we'll make is we will write the characters in the correct order on the blackboard. One, because it's easier, and two, because you guys will be able to read it then.
Right, and then we don't have to write from in here. These are written backwards.
Yes. So yeah, so that's outstanding. And we are thinking about doing some more of these MOOCs, maybe some longer ones, more than 2 sessions, maybe 3 or 4, so we can go more in depth. But if there are things that you would be interested in us tackling in this format, please let us know that, because we do take your feedback into consideration when we make our schedule.
That's right.
So thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you at future distance learning events.
This